The galaxy was ruled by the iron grip of the Zarin Empire, a ruthless force that crushed any sign of rebellion without mercy. Planets fell under their control, species were enslaved, and those who dared to rise against them were swiftly destroyed. Among their ranks was Princess Solera, once a symbol of nobility and power, now a fallen disgrace. She had dared to speak out against the Empire's cruelty, questioning the wars and the slaughter. For that defiance, her father, Emperor Malcor, delivered a punishment more brutal than death. Stripped of her royal status and branded a traitor, Solera stood in chains, her wrists bound and her once elegant armor replaced with a simple, ragged tunic. The cold metal bit into her skin as two imperial guards dragged her through the dim corridors of a remote military outpost. The air smelled of oil, smoke, and blood. This was a human war camp, far from the polished halls of her former life. When they reached the command chamber, the guards threw her forward. Solera stumbled but didn't fall. Lifting her chin, she met the eyes of the man seated before her, Captain Dax Hunter, a human. She had heard stories of him, whispers of his victories, and the fear he inspired even among her people. Humans were considered weak, inferior, used as cannon fodder and slaves in the Empire's wars. But Dax, he was different. He sat relaxed in his chair, his dark eyes cool and unreadable. His face was scared, a testament to battles survived, and his muscled frame spoke of strength and discipline. But what caught Solera's attention most was the sharp intelligence behind his gaze. He looked at her not with cruelty, but with curiosity. "The Emperor's gift," one of the guards sneered. "She's yours now, Captain. Do whatever you want with her." Solera braced herself, ready for humiliation. She had seen what happened to slaves, especially women. But Dax only raised an eyebrow. "You're not my property," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But out here, you either fight or you die. Your choice." His words stunned her. No mockery, no threats, just a cold, simple truth. Before she could respond, alarms blared through the base. The sound of gunfire erupted outside, followed by the unmistakable screech of Empire drones. Dax was on his feet in an instant, barking orders into his comm. "Assassins," he muttered grimly. "They didn't just send you here to suffer. They want you dead." The doors burst open, and the fight began. Imperial assassins poured into the room, their sleek armor glinting under the dim lights. Solera had no weapon, no way to defend herself, but Dax moved like lightning, with a high-tech cloaking device flickering around him. He disappeared and reappeared in flashes, cutting down attackers with brutal efficiency. The room became a storm of bullets, blades, and blood. One of the assassins lunged at Solera. She ducked under the strike and kicked out, sending the enemy sprawling. She wasn't helpless. Years of royal training had made her a formidable fighter. But against this many foes, survival seemed impossible. Just as an assassin's blade slashed toward her throat, Dax was there. He blocked the strike with his own weapon, his face set in grim focus. The two fought back to back, an unlikely alliance forged in fire. When the last enemy fell, the room was silent except for their ragged breathing. Dax looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Why does your father want you dead so badly?" Solera wiped blood from her face, her defiance undimmed. "Because I know his secrets, and if you keep me alive, you'll know them too." The war camp was a cold, harsh place, far from the luxury Solera had once known. Soldiers trained relentlessly, their lives balanced on the edge of survival. Dax's reputation was well-earned. He pushed his troops hard, demanded discipline, and led from the front. Solera expected hostility from the humans. After all, she was the daughter of their greatest enemy. And she got it. Glares, whispered insults, the occasional threat. But Dax never mistreated her. He didn't pamper her either. He made her work, made her fight. When an attack came a week later, the camp erupted into chaos. Empire drones rained fire from the skies, and ground forces swarmed the perimeter. Celera fought alongside the humans, her skills finally earning their grudging respect. But it was Dax who saved her life again, dragging her from the wreckage of a collapsing tower. As he bandaged her wounds in the aftermath, she saw something in him she hadn't expected: kindness. It was hidden behind his tough exterior, but it was there. And it made her wonder why a man like him fought so hard, not just for survival, but for his people's freedom. The truth came out one night around a flickering fire. Dax told her of Earth, of a homeworld destroyed by the Empire's expansion, of families torn apart, entire cities turned to ash. The humans fought not just for survival, but for vengeance, and for hope. When she asked why he had saved her, why he kept protecting her when his own people wanted her dead, he didn't answer right away. "Maybe because I see something in you," he said finally. "Someone who's tired of being a puppet." The Resistance's next mission was their most dangerous yet: an assault on an Imperial outpost to steal vital intelligence. Celera volunteered to go. Despite the risks, she wanted to prove herself. The mission went wrong from the start. Betrayed by a spy within their ranks, the team was ambushed. Dax fought like a man possessed, cutting through enemy lines to protect his soldiers. Celera stayed by his side, the two of them an unstoppable force. But then the enemy brought out their secret weapon, an eye-controlled war machine. The hulking robot unleashed a storm of destruction, and one by one, their comrades fell. When Dax was wounded, Celera made a choice. She activated his cloaking device and dragged him to safety, refusing to leave him behind. For the first time, she realized the depth of her feelings for him, and the fear of losing him tore at her heart. The final battle came swiftly. The Resistance launched an all-out assault on the Empire's command center, hoping to end the war once and for all. Dax and Celera led the charge, their bond unbreakable. Inside the heart of the Empire's fortress, Celera faced her father. The Emperor's rage was terrible, but she stood her ground. In their final duel, she fought not as his daughter, but as a warrior of humanity. And when she defeated him, she made the hardest choice of all, sparing his life so he would see his empire fall. With the AI fleet shut down and the Empire in ruins, victory belonged to the Resistance. But the cost was high. Dax lay gravely wounded, and Celera refused to leave his side. When he finally woke, his hand found hers. "You stayed," he murmured. "Always," she whispered. Their love had been forged in war, tempered by loss, and strengthened by trust. In the aftermath, they stood together, not as human and alien, not as soldier and slave, but as equals. And as they looked toward the stars, they knew their fight wasn't over. But together, they could face anything. Celera's body ached with exhaustion, but her spirit remained unbroken. The endless marches across the war-ravaged planet took their toll, the harsh winds biting against her skin and the sun baking the ground beneath her feet. Despite her noble blood and years of combat training, this was a world unlike anything she'd ever known. The Empire's reach had turned this once thriving colony into a wasteland, littered with the ruins of cities and the bones of the fallen. And through it all, there was him, Dax Hunter, the human soldier who should have treated her like a trophy or a slave. Instead, he was distant but fair, treating her with a strange kind of respect. He never demanded her submission, never used his authority over her in cruel ways. That made him dangerous in a different way, because she couldn't figure him out. As they walked in silence, she studied him from the corner of her eye. He moved like a predator, his every step measured and ready for battle. His weapon never left his side, his dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The stories she'd heard of him hadn't done him justice. He was more than just a fearsome warrior. He was a survivor, and whether she liked it or not, her survival now depended on him. The first attack came without warning. One moment the landscape was silent, the next it erupted in chaos. Empire-controlled drones descended from the sky, their energy weapons scorching the ground. Celera dove for cover as Dax opened fire, his rifle spitting rounds with lethal precision. "Stay down," he barked, moving toward the nearest piece of wreckage for better cover. But Celira had never been one to hide. Grabbing a fallen mercenary's weapon, she rose and fired. Her shots struck true, one drone spiraling to the ground in flames. Dax glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face before returning to focus. More enemies poured in, alien mercenaries loyal to the Empire, their armor gleaming in the sun. The battle turned brutal and fast, close quarters combat breaking out among the ruins. Celira found herself back-to-back with Dax, their movements in perfect sync. She slashed with her blade as he fired, their enemies falling around them. When the last mercenary lay still, silence returned. Celira was breathing hard, her muscles screaming with exertion. Dax wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes meeting hers. "Not bad," he admitted, "for a princess." She glared at him, but there was no real heat behind it. They had fought well together, and some part of her hated how right it had felt. They found shelter in the wreckage of a downed transport ship as night fell. The air grew cold, and Celira shivered despite herself. She refused to show weakness, sitting a short distance from the fire Dax had built. "Why didn't you leave me back there?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't look up from cleaning his weapon. "Because I don't leave people behind." It was a simple answer, but it left her unsettled. The Empire had taught her that humans were savages, brutal, and selfish. But Dax kept proving those lessons wrong. The next day, the fighting resumed. Another ambush, this time more coordinated. They were forced into the belly of the wrecked ship, the tight corridors turning the battle into a deadly maze. Blades flashed and bullets flew, and in the chaos, Celira felt pain explode through her side. She staggered, her vision swimming. Blood soaked her tunic, and she collapsed against the wall, expecting this to be the end. But then Dax was there, his arms strong as they pulled her to safety. "Stay with me," he ordered, his voice rough but steady. She expected him to leave her behind once they reached a safe room, but instead, he knelt beside her, tearing a strip of fabric from his own shirt to bandage her wound. His hands were surprisingly gentle, his touch careful despite the urgency. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she whispered, pain making her voice weak. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his words were quiet. "Because you're not my enemy." The line between them blurred after that. As they traveled, she began to see the humans not as the Empire had painted them, but as they truly were, fierce, resourceful survivors fighting against impossible odds. And Dax, he was their leader not because of his strength, but because of his heart. One evening, as they rested in a hidden cave, she found herself sitting closer to him than usual. The firelight cast shadows on his face, highlighting the scars and the weariness in his eyes. "You fight for them," she said softly. "But what do you fight for?" He was silent for a long time. "For a future where my people don't have to live in fear, where we're not hunted, enslaved, or wiped out. That's why I keep fighting." Something shifted between them that night, a fragile understanding, a bond forged in blood and fire. But trust was a dangerous thing. The truth came when she least expected it. They had found an old resistance hideout, and while Dax was scouting the area, she stumbled upon a communicator. The message it played chilled her to the bone. "Hunter, the resistance needs that intel. The princess is our best chance. Get her to trust you, and we can finally take the Empire down from the inside." Her stomach twisted. All his kindness, his protection, it had been a lie. She was just a tool, a means to an end. When he returned, she confronted him, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "Was any of it real?" she demanded. "Or was I just your mission?" He didn't deny it, but there was something in his face, regret, pain, that made her hesitate. "It started as a mission," he admitted, "but it stopped being one a long time ago." Before she could respond, the ground shook with the impact of approaching ships. The Empire had found them. But Celira had never been one to hide. Grabbing a fallen mercenary's weapon, she rose and fired. Her shot struck true, one drone spiraling to the ground in flames. Dax glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face before returning to focus. More enemies poured in. Alien mercenaries loyal to the Empire, their armor gleaming in the sun. The battle turned brutal and fast, close-quarters combat breaking out among the ruins. Celira found herself back-to-back with Dax, their movements in perfect sync. She slashed with her blade as he fired, their enemies falling around them. When the last mercenary lay still, silence returned. Celira was breathing hard, her muscles screaming with exertion. Dax wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes meeting hers. "Not bad," he admitted, "for a princess." She glared at him, but there was no real heat behind it. They had fought well together, and some part of her hated how right it had felt. They found shelter in the wreckage of a downed transport ship as night fell. The air grew cold, and Celira shivered despite herself. She refused to show weakness, sitting a short distance from the fire Dax had built. "Why didn't you leave me back there?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't look up from cleaning his weapon. "Because I don't leave people behind." It was a simple answer, but it left her unsettled. The Empire had taught her that humans were savages, brutal, and selfish. But Dax kept proving those lessons wrong. The next day, the fighting resumed. Another ambush, this time more coordinated. They were forced into the belly of the wrecked ship, the tight corridors turning the battle into a deadly maze. Blades flashed and bullets flew, and in the chaos, Celira felt pain explode through her side. She staggered, her vision swimming. Blood soaked her tunic, and she collapsed against the wall, expecting this to be the end. But then Dax was there, his arms strong as they pulled her to safety. "Stay with me," he ordered, his voice rough but steady. She expected him to leave her behind once they reached a safe room, but instead, he knelt beside her, tearing a strip of fabric from his own shirt to bandage her wound. His hands were surprisingly gentle, his touch careful despite the urgency. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she whispered, pain making her voice weak. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his words were quiet. "Because you're not my enemy." The line between them blurred after that. As they traveled, she began to see the humans not as the Empire had painted them, but as they truly were, fierce, resourceful survivors fighting against impossible odds. And Dax, he was their leader not because of his strength, but because of his heart. One evening, as they rested in a hidden cave, she found herself sitting closer to him than usual. The firelight cast shadows on his face, highlighting the scars and the weariness in his eyes. "You fight for them," she said softly. "But what do you fight for?" He was silent for a long time. "For a future where my people don't have to live in fear, where we're not hunted, enslaved, or wiped out. That's why I keep fighting." Something shifted between them that night, a fragile understanding, a bond forged in blood and fire. But trust was a dangerous thing. The truth came when she least expected it. They had found an old resistance hideout, and while Dax was scouting the area, she stumbled upon a communicator. The message it played chilled her to the bone. "Hunter, the resistance needs that intel. The princess is our best chance. Get her to trust you, and we can finally take the Empire down from the inside." Her stomach twisted. All his kindness, his protection, it had been a lie. She was just a tool, a means to an end. When he returned, she confronted him, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "Was any of it real?" she demanded. "Or was I just your mission?" He didn't deny it, but there was something in his face, regret, pain, that made her hesitate. "It started as a mission," he admitted, "but it stopped being one a long time ago." Before she could respond, the ground shook with the impact of approaching ships. The Empire had found them. The fight was brutal and desperate. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But even as the enemy closed in, Dax fought to protect her. And when they were finally captured, It was his defiance that kept her hope alive. In the cold confines of their prison cell, she looked at him through the dim light. "You lied to me," she said quietly. "I did," he agreed. "But I never lied about how much I care." And despite everything, she believed him. The rebel base was nothing like Celira had expected. It wasn't the dark, savage hideout she'd been taught to imagine. No, it was far more organized and determined. Every human there carried the weight of survival on their shoulders, their eyes filled with defiance. Yet those same eyes turned cold and suspicious whenever they landed on her. They didn't trust her. And why would they? She was the daughter of the emperor who had ordered their worlds burned and their families slaughtered. She was a symbol of everything they hated. Dax's people watched her like a predator waiting for the first sign of weakness. Conversations stopped when she entered a room, and whispers followed her footsteps. It didn't matter that she'd fought alongside them or bled on the same battlefield. They saw only an enemy. But Celira wasn't here for their approval. At least, that's what she told herself. One night, while wandering the dim corridors of the underground stronghold, she stumbled upon a heated argument. She paused just out of sight, her sharp hearing picking up every word. "They're moving faster than we thought," a woman's voice said. "The extermination fleet will reach the colonies in days. We won't have time to evacuate everyone." "We don't need to evacuate," another voice, gruff and angry, cut in. "We need to hit them first, take out their command ships before they can deploy the AI drones." Celira's blood ran cold. Extermination fleet, AI drones. The Empire had always spoken of humans as a nuisance to be managed. But this was genocide. "They'll never see us coming," the woman continued. "But we'll need every soldier we have." "Not every soldier," the man said bitterly. "We've got a traitor in our midst. You think we don't know she's been listening, waiting for a chance to run back to her father." Celira's fists clenched. She knew they meant her. And worse, she didn't know if they were wrong. That night, sleep refused to come. She lay on the makeshift bed in Dax's quarters, staring at the ceiling. The choice tore at her. If she went back to the Empire and revealed what she'd heard, her father might welcome her home. She could reclaim her title, her life. But if she stayed, she would be an enemy of her own people forever. The door creaked open, and Dax entered, his face worn with exhaustion. He said nothing as he sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumped. "You heard them," she said softly. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "They're scared. They have every right to be." "And you?" she asked. "Do you trust me?" He looked at her then, his dark eyes searching hers. "I want to." It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, but it was the truth, and that mattered more. The attack came at dawn. The Empire's enforcers struck without warning, their black-armored soldiers flooding the base. Sirens wailed, and the ground shook with explosions. Celira grabbed a weapon and followed Dax into the chaos, their steps perfectly in sync. But the fight didn't last long. A squad of enforcers cornered them near the hangar, their weapons raised. Celira fought with everything she had, but it wasn't enough. A stun blast hit her square in the chest, and darkness claimed her. When she woke, cold metal pressed against her skin. The prison ship was sterile and silent, the air thick with the hum of machinery. Shackles bound her wrists, and the walls closed in around her. No one would come for her. Except someone did. The first explosion rattled the ship, the lights flickering overhead. Shouts echoed through the corridors, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Celira sat up, her heart pounding. It couldn't be. The door to her cell blew inward, and there he was. Dax stood in the smoke-filled doorway, his weapon still raised, his face a mask of fury and determination. "You came," she whispered, disbelief and something warmer flooding through her. "Of course I did," he said, striding toward her. "You think I'm going to let them take you?" He broke the shackles with a well-placed shot, then pulled her to her feet. The ship rocked beneath them as they ran, their footsteps pounding against the floor. Enforcers closed in from all sides, but Dax was unstoppable. He fought like a man possessed, cutting down their enemies with brutal efficiency. At one point, Celira stumbled, her injuries slowing her down. Dax was there in an instant, his arm wrapping around her waist to keep her upright. "I'm slowing you down," she gasped. "Leave me." "Not a chance," he growled. "We leave together, or not at all." They reached the hangar just as a squad of soldiers closed in. Celira's breath caught. There were too many. They'd never make it to the ship. But Dax didn't hesitate. He pushed her behind cover, his eyes fierce. "Stay down." "No." She grabbed his arm. "You can't." "I can." His voice softened. "But I won't leave you." The battle was a blur of noise and blood. Celira fought beside him, the two of them a whirlwind of destruction, and when the last soldier fell, they stood together, breathless and victorious. As the stolen ship sped away from the prison vessel, Celira stared at the man who had risked everything for her. No one, not even her own blood, had ever fought for her like that. "You could have died," she said quietly. He shrugged, his lips curving into a tired smile. "So could you." Something broke inside her then. The walls she built, the loyalty to an empire that had never cared for her, it all fell away. "I won't go back," she whispered. "Not ever." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "Then what will you fight for?" "For this," she said. "For you." The battlefield stretched out in fire and ruin, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and blood. Celira stood beside Dax, her heart pounding in her chest. The Empire's forces were closing in again, relentless and merciless, and the rebel stronghold was on the brink of collapse. Yet despite the chaos, she felt strangely calm. She had made her choice. She would fight for humanity. She would fight for him. Dax's voice crackled through the comms, steady and commanding. "We hold the line here. No one falls back until the civilians are clear." Celira watched him move with a confidence she couldn't help but admire. He was a warrior in every sense of the word, a man who had survived against impossible odds, and somehow, against every instinct, she had started caring for him. More than caring. But there was no time for that. Not now. The attack came like a storm. Empire-controlled drones and heavily armed alien mercenaries poured into the stronghold. Celira fought at Dax's side, her movements swift and lethal. She had been trained in combat since childhood, but fighting alongside him was different. They moved in perfect sync, covering each other's blind spots, their trust in battle growing with every strike. When a squad of drones broke through the defenses, she didn't hesitate. She took the lead, using her knowledge of the Empire's tactics to outmaneuver them. She knew exactly how they would react, how they thought. And it worked. "Nice move," Dax muttered as they regrouped. His eyes flicked to her, something like respect shining there. "Don't sound so surprised," she shot back, a small smirk tugging at her lips despite the danger. But there was no time for banter. The enemy was relentless. As they pushed forward, clearing a path for the retreating civilians, Celira caught glimpses of the destruction the Empire had brought. Families huddled in fear, children crying, homes reduced to ash. It fueled her rage and her resolve. And then the sky opened up. The first orbital strike hit with the force of a falling star, sending shockwaves through the ground. The stronghold erupted in fire and debris. Celira's ears rang from the blast, and for a terrifying moment, she couldn't tell if she was still alive. When she pushed herself up, coughing against the dust, her heart stopped. Dax was gone. She searched frantically, her vision swimming. And then she saw him, pinned beneath a collapsed support beam, his face pale and streaked with blood. Civilians were still trying to flee around him, but he had been protecting them when the strike hit. "No," she whispered, the word breaking as she ran to him. He was still breathing, but barely. She strained against the weight of the beam, her muscles burning. When it finally shifted, she dragged him out, her hands trembling. Dax, she whispered urgently, cradling his face. Stay with me, please. His eyes fluttered open, and when they focused on her, something inside her cracked. You shouldn't. He coughed, his voice weak. You should have left me. I'm not leaving you, she said fiercely. Ever. The words hung between them, raw and unspoken for too long. She pressed her forehead to his, the fear of losing him overwhelming everything else. And in that moment, she realized there was no point in holding back anymore. I love you, she whispered. His breath hitched, and when he looked at her again, there was something softer in his eyes, something she had never dared hope for. Solara. He didn't finish, but the way his hand gripped hers said enough. But there was no time for more. The Empire's forces were regrouping, and the final battle loomed on the horizon. The fight wasn't over yet, and if they wanted to survive, they would have to face the Empire's deadliest weapons. Together. The battlefield stretched far and wide, the air thick with smoke and the deafening sound of war. Explosions tore through the ground, lighting up the night sky in flashes of orange and red. Solara stood at Dax's side, her heart pounding, her body tense. The time had come, the final battle. The fate of millions rested on what they did next. Dax's voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady despite the danger around them. We push forward. The AI Command Center is our only target. If we take it down, we stop the extermination fleet. Solara nodded, her eyes meeting his. Despite the destruction surrounding them, there was a quiet strength in his gaze, a strength that had become her anchor. She had come a long way from the arrogant princess the Empire had cast aside. Now she was a warrior. Now she fought for something bigger than herself. She fought for him. The rebel forces moved as one, pushing toward the heavily fortified command center. Empire drones swarmed the battlefield, their cold, metallic bodies raining fire on the advancing humans. Solara fought alongside Dax, her twin blades flashing through the air. She was fast, precise, but the Empire's forces were endless. Dax. Left flank, she shouted, spinning to deflect a drone's attack. He was already moving, his rifle blazing. The two of them fought in perfect harmony, covering each other's blind spots, their trust built through every battle they had survived. But the enemy was relentless. They lost soldiers with every step forward. The ground was littered with the bodies of their friends, their comrades. And still, they kept going. A sudden explosion sent Solara crashing to the ground. The breath knocked from her lungs. She forced herself up, her vision swimming, just in time to see one of Dax's closest friends, Marcus, fall beneath a wave of Empire troops. No, Dax's voice cracked, but there was no time to mourn. The command center loomed ahead, a towering structure of steel and cold light. But the closer they got, the fiercer the resistance became. The Empire knew what was at stake, and they would not let the rebels take it without a fight. As they reached the entrance, a hail of gunfire forced them into cover. We're not getting through this without a distraction, Dax growled, his face streaked with sweat and blood. I'll do it, Solara said without hesitation. No. His hand shot out, gripping her arm. You're not. I'm the only one who can. She cut him off, her voice fierce. I know their tactics. I know their defenses. And I'm fast enough to make it back. He stared at her, his jaw tight. Solara. Trust me. She softened her voice, her fingers brushing against his. We don't have a choice. Before he could stop her, she was already moving. She darted through the enemy line, drawing fire away from the rebels. The world became a blur of light and sound. And then she was inside the command center. The halls were eerily quiet compared to the chaos outside. But she wasn't alone. You shouldn't have come here, daughter. The voice sent a chill down her spine. She turned slowly, and there he was, the Emperor, her father. His face was a mask of cold disapproval. You've disgraced our bloodline. Siding with these creatures. But it's not too late. End this foolishness, and I may still show mercy." "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm done being your puppet." The duel began. He was faster than she remembered, stronger, but she had something he didn't. She had something worth fighting for. Their blades clashed, sparks flying with every strike. Pain flared through her body as his weapon found its mark, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. And then she saw her opening. With a swift, precise strike, she disarmed him. He fell to his knees, his face pale with shock. The fight was over. "Finish it," he spat, his eyes burning with hate. But she didn't. "You don't deserve death," she said quietly. "You deserve to watch everything you built fall apart." She turned away, leaving him behind. The empire would crumble, and he would live to see it. But there was no time to savor the victory. She raced back to the battlefield and found Dax. He was on the ground, barely breathing, his body broken and bloodied. "No," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "Stay with me, please." "I tried," he rasped, his hand reaching for hers. "I love you." Tears blurred her vision. "You're not dying. I won't let you." With the last of her strength, she carried him from the battlefield. The I Command Center fell moments later, the fleet shutting down just in time. Millions were saved. The war was over. But victory had come at a cost. He, quiet after the storm, felt almost unnatural. The sounds of war had faded, replaced by a stillness that felt heavy with loss and hope. Celira sat in the dimly lit med bay, her hand wrapped around Dax's as if her grip alone could keep him tethered to life. The monitors around them beeped steadily, a reminder that he was still alive, but only barely. His face was pale, his body wrapped in bandages. The brutal battle had left its mark, and the medics weren't sure if he'd survive. But Celira refused to accept the possibility of losing him. She had never believed in miracles before, but now she prayed for one. The war was over. The Empire's AI fleet had been shut down, and the Emperor's reign of terror had begun to crumble. But there was no victory in her heart. Not yet. Not while Dax lay on the edge of death. She hadn't left his side since she carried him from the battlefield. The other rebels had tried to convince her to rest, but she had ignored them. Every time his breathing faltered, her heart clenched in fear. She couldn't lose him. Not after everything they had been through. As she sat there, memories flooded her mind. Their first meeting, when she had been thrown at his feet, humiliated and furious. She had expected cruelty, but instead he had offered her a choice: fight or die. It had been the first time anyone had given her the chance to prove herself. Then there were the battles they had fought side by side. The moments when he had saved her life without hesitation. The way he had treated her with respect, even when everyone else saw her as nothing more than a war prize. Slowly, he had broken down the walls she had built around her heart. And now she realized the truth. She loved him. The sound of his breathing changed, a soft groan escaping his lips. Celira's heart leaped as his fingers twitched in her hand. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his face. "Dax." Her voice was barely a whisper. His eyelids fluttered, and after a long, agonizing moment, his eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, but when they found her, a faint smile curved his lips. "You look terrible," he rasped. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, half sob, half relief. "You idiot," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You almost died." "Yeah, but I didn't." His voice was weak, but the warmth in his gaze was strong. His fingers tightened around hers. "You carried me." "Of course I did," she said fiercely. "I wasn't going to let you go." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening. "So, does this mean you're staying?" For the first time in what felt like forever, Celira smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I think you already know the answer." Time passed, and Dax grew stronger every day. The rebels celebrated their victory, but the cost had been high. Friends had been lost, and the galaxy had been forever changed. The Empire was falling, but the fight wasn't over yet. There were still battles to be fought, still people to protect. But through it all, Solyra and Dax stayed by each other's side. Their bond, forged in the fires of war, only grew stronger. They trained together, fought together, and when the nights were quiet and the stars shone bright, they found comfort in each other's arms. One evening, as they sat outside the rebel base, watching the twin moons rise, Dax reached for her hand. "You never told me why you stayed," he said quietly. Solyra turned to him, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Because you showed me what it means to fight for something real, for people who deserve better, for hope." She paused, her voice softening. "And because you risked everything for me. No one's ever done that before." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You were worth the risk." They kissed then, a slow, gentle meeting of lips that spoke of everything they had been through, and everything still to come. Their love became a legend. The human who defied an empire and the alien princess who chose humanity over her own people. Together, they stood against the darkness, their hearts united by a love that had defied the stars. And no matter what battles lay ahead, they knew they would face them together.